Everyone loves a World Cup upset. The giant falls, the underdog celebrates, the football world moves on. But some victories feel different. Some victories don't feel like an upset at all. They feel like a heist, like one team walked into a match they weren't supposed to win, took everything, and disappeared before anyone understood what had happened. And that's exactly what South Korea did against Czechia. Because before a ball was kicked, the script seemed already written. On one side stood Czechia, a nation with a long footballing tradition, a team built on European experience, physical strength, and tactical structure. The kind of side that rarely beats itself. The kind of side experts trust. The kind of side nobody wants to face in a tournament match. On the other side stood South Korea, talented, dangerous, but still viewed by many as outsiders. A team respected for their energy and discipline, yet rarely considered favorites when facing established European opposition. The predictions reflected that. The expectations reflected that. Even the atmosphere surrounding the match reflected that. For Czechia, this was supposed to be another step forward. For South Korea, it was supposed to be a test. But what nobody realized before kickoff was that South Korea had absolutely no interest in following the script, and the first clues appeared long before the decisive moments. Because from the opening exchanges, something felt unusual. Not dramatic, not obvious, just unusual. South Korea weren't trying to dominate possession. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't chasing control. Instead, they looked comfortable without the ball. Comfortable allowing Czechia to feel confident. Comfortable allowing them to believe the match was unfolding exactly as expected. At first glance, it looked risky, maybe even passive. But appearances can be deceiving, and that would become one of the most important themes of the entire match. Because while Czechia enjoyed possession, South Korea were collecting information. Every pass, every movement, every pattern, every weakness. The game was moving exactly where Czechia wanted it, or at least that's what they thought. The warning signs were already there. Almost nobody noticed them. The longer the match continued, the more Czechia pushed forward. The more they advanced, the more confident they became. And confidence can be a dangerous thing in football. Not because confidence is bad, but because excessive confidence can quietly turn into complacency. The difference between the two is often invisible until it's too late. South Korea understood this. Their players remained patient, disciplined, focused. They resisted the temptation to force attacks that weren't available. They resisted the temptation to abandon their structure. Most importantly, they resisted panic. Because tournament football isn't always about controlling the match. Sometimes it's about controlling the moments. And moments are where everything changed. As pressure mounted, Czechia began committing more players forward. Not recklessly, not carelessly, just enough to leave tiny spaces behind. Tiny gaps, tiny opportunities. The kind of opportunities that don't matter against most opponents. But South Korea aren't most opponents, especially when they sense vulnerability. Suddenly, transitions became sharper. Runs became more aggressive. Passes became more direct. The match was starting to accelerate. And when football begins moving faster than expected, mistakes become far more expensive. Then came a moment that seemed insignificant, at least at first. A misplaced decision, a slight hesitation, a breakdown in concentration. Nothing spectacular, nothing that would immediately appear in highlight packages. But looking back now, it may have been the moment everything started to unravel for Czechia. Because football matches rarely collapse in a single instant. They crack first, then they break. And South Korea could see the crack forming. What happened next completely transformed the emotional balance of the game. Until that point, Czechia had looked comfortable. Now uncertainty entered the equation. The crowd could feel it. The players could feel it. Even the pace of the match began to change. For the first time, Czechia weren't simply playing football. They were thinking about consequences. And when players start thinking about consequences, hesitation follows. 1 second becomes 2. 1 touch becomes 3. Confidence starts asking questions. Questions create doubt. And doubt is lethal in tournament football. South Korea sensed it immediately. You could see it in their movement. You could see it in their aggression. Most importantly, you could see it in their belief. Because belief is contagious. When one player starts believing, another follows, then another. Then an entire team begins seeing possibilities where others see obstacles. Suddenly, South Korea weren't surviving. They were threatening. The team expected to absorb pressure was now creating it. And Czechia had a problem, a serious one. They were no longer facing the opponent they prepared for. They were facing an opponent growing stronger with every passing minute. The psychological battle had completely shifted, but the real turning point was still coming. The moment people would remember. The moment that transformed a competitive match into a World Cup story. Because football has an extraordinary way of rewarding patience, especially when patience is backed by courage. South Korea had spent so much energy staying organized, staying disciplined, staying connected. Now came the opportunity to cash in, and when it arrived, they took it, ruthlessly. One opening, one mistake, one decisive action. That's all it took. The stadium changed instantly. Everything changed instantly. The confidence that had surrounded Czechia suddenly disappeared. The belief that had fueled South Korea exploded. What looked impossible before kickoff suddenly felt real. And that's the moment every favorite fears. Not conceding, believing they might actually lose. Because once that thought enters a team's mind, it becomes difficult to remove. The pressure becomes heavier. The clock moves faster. Every attack feels urgent. Every missed opportunity feels catastrophic. Czechia now carried all of that weight. South Korea carried something else, freedom. And freedom is incredibly dangerous, especially in a World Cup. The underdog suddenly had nothing to lose. The favorite suddenly had everything to lose. The emotional scales had flipped. What happened next revealed the true strength of South Korea's performance. Many teams can score. Far fewer teams can manage what comes after. Because protecting a lead in a major tournament is often harder than earning it. Panic destroys structure. Fear destroys decision-making. Desperation destroys discipline. South Korea refused to let any of those things happen. Instead, they became even more organized, even more focused, even more committed. Every challenge mattered. Every clearance mattered. Every recovery run mattered. The players understood what was at stake. Not just 3 points, not just a result. Something much bigger. Respect, validation, a statement, an opportunity to reshape how the football world viewed them. Meanwhile, Czechia threw everything forward. The urgency became impossible to ignore. Attacks arrived in waves. Pressure intensified. The tension inside the stadium became almost unbearable. Because everyone knew one goal could change everything again? And for brief moments, it felt possible, maybe even likely. This is what makes tournament football so emotionally exhausting. Momentum never stays still. It moves, constantly. 1 minute you're celebrating, the next you're defending your future. South Korea experienced that reality in real time. Every minute felt longer. Every challenge carried greater significance. Every decision carried greater risk. But the remarkable thing was how composed they remained. Not perfect. Composed. There's a difference. Perfection doesn't exist in football. Composure does. And South Korea displayed it when it mattered most. Again and again. The deeper the match went, the clearer the story became. This wasn't luck. This wasn't randomness. This wasn't a fortunate accident. This was preparation meeting opportunity. This was a team understanding exactly what kind of match they needed. More importantly, it was a team trusting that plan even when the pressure became overwhelming. Many teams abandon their identity when facing adversity. South Korea embraced theirs. And that's why the final moments felt so powerful. Because by then, everyone could see what had happened. The team expected to react had dictated the emotional flow of the entire contest. The team expected to survive had controlled the most important moments. The team expected to struggle had forced Czechia into desperation. When the final whistle finally arrived, the reaction said everything. Relief, joy, disbelief, pride, all mixed together. The South Korean players celebrated knowing they had accomplished something significant. Not because they had simply won, because of how they won. Because they had stared down expectations and refused to be intimidated by them. Because they had remained patient when others demanded urgency. Because they had remained disciplined when others expected chaos. Because they had trusted themselves when much of the football world trusted someone else. For Czechia, the emotions were very different. Shock, frustration, regret. The painful realization that controlling portions of a match means very little if you lose control of the moments that matter most. And that lesson can be brutal at a World Cup. Because World Cups don't reward reputation. They don't reward predictions. They don't reward expectations. They reward execution, nothing else. The consequences extended beyond a single result. Suddenly, the group looked different. The calculations changed. The pressure changed. The possibilities changed. One match had altered the landscape. One result had rewritten assumptions. One performance had created new belief, not only inside the South Korean dressing room, but throughout the entire group. That's the hidden power of victories like this. They don't just affect standings, they affect psychology. Every future opponent now viewed South Korea differently. Every future match carried a different level of respect. Every future challenge became slightly more complicated because the surprise factor was gone. The football world had been warned. And maybe that's the biggest legacy of this story. Not the scoreline, not the headlines, not even the celebration. The legacy is the reminder that World Cups remain football's greatest stage precisely because they refuse to follow expectations. Every tournament arrives with predictions. Experts make forecasts. Fans create narratives. Favorites are identified. Outsiders are overlooked. Then football begins. And suddenly, none of those assumptions feel quite so certain. South Korea's victory over Czechia wasn't memorable because it shocked people. It was memorable because it exposed something deeper. The difference between expectation and reality. The difference between reputation and performance. The difference between controlling a match and controlling its destiny. At the start of the night, Czechia looked like the safer bet, the stronger name, the more established side. By the end of the night, none of that mattered, because South Korea discovered something far more valuable, a way to turn patience into pressure, pressure into mistakes, mistakes into opportunity, and opportunity into victory. A victory that felt less like an upset and more like a perfectly planned robbery, the kind nobody sees coming until it's already over. And by then, there's nothing left to do except admire how it happened.